Okay, hello and welcome to the module. What we're going to do with these first few videos is to run through the foundations of what we'll be covering on the module. And we've got a range of different areas that I want to unpack. Most of them are only about 10-15 minutes long, but really just want to kind of knit them together as providing a framework through which you can understand the rest of the things that we're going to do on the module, in which there are more videos that we'll cover these in more detail that you'll come across as we work through the various aspects. What we're going to do on this particular video is simply to introduce the module, the subject, the approach that we're taking towards it, and what's going to be expected of you on the module. So some module housekeeping. The way that we're going to work, the work that you're going to do, and the assessment that lies at the end of this. So we're just going to take us through those 3 or 4 little areas. So we'll start out by introducing myself. So my name's Nick Creevy-Atwood. I'm running this module. I've been running this module or versions of it for a long time now, and I've been fine-tuning it and developing it in a way which is quite different to some of the other ways that you might come across these subjects taught in different institutions. But we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. What we're dealing with in this module are 2 interlinked areas of study. We've got employee rewards and we've got employment relations. And most of the time those subjects are taught independently of each other, or they're taught one after another. The approach that we're going to take here today is to integrate them much more closely, because in reality, for most people, the rewards that they get from work are a fundamental part of the relationships that they have with their employer, with their work organisation. So we're going to try and put them together and see them as being interlinked, and we'll talk through now just how that works and how that differs from much of the way that you might come across these subjects in many institutions. So most of the time, for many years now, the topic, particularly of reward, has been considered as a strategic issue. We describe it as strategic reward, or the new pay, various ways that it's been conceived of. For decades and decades before that, of course, pay was just seen as part of the nuts and bolts of how you go about running an organisation. If you want employees, then you have to pay them, and you have to pay them a rate that's acceptable to them, seems fair, that motivates a little bit, but not a huge amount of thought went into it. Alongside the growth of human resource management in the 90s and after that, the whole focus became about strategic approaches to the management of people, and reward was taken up with the same kind of approach. So the way that this is supposed to work is much like any other aspect of people management. An organisation thinks about its strategic objectives. What is it for? What does it do? What markets does it compete in? Who is it competing with? What behaviours does it need in order to succeed in those areas? And to use that as the starting point for thinking about pay and rewards. So you start with that idea of what do we need? What do we do? How can we get people to do the things that make us more successful? And then build our rewards around the behaviours and encouraging the behaviours, motivating and incentivizing people to do the things that we think leads to greater success. And that having done that, having made that link between business strategy and our reward system, then that leads to further success for the organisation. Now the approach that we're going to take here is a little bit different, because as you can see, there's a big gap here. There's a gap between this idea of corporate strategy and rewards. There's something that actually lies in the middle. And that thing that lies in the middle is all about the employment relationship. It's all about the fact that, well, organisations might have those strategic reasons for paying people in the way that they do, but employees have their own reasons for wanting pay and for seeking different forms of pay or different amounts of pay and so on. And that those reasons, those interests, those objectives around pay are not necessarily or even likely to be in alignment with each other. So we can do whatever we want. We can, kind of kid ourselves that what we're doing is taking a strategic approach to pay, but what we're actually doing is blinding ourselves to the fact that there's a whole other side of employee rewards that we need to focus on, and that's what rewards mean for employees. The subjects of reward, the people who we want rewards to work for. So this is where the employment relationship comes in, and this is where people like William Trevor kind of have a more realistic take on the nature of rewards and how they sit within the employment relationship, because he talks about reward management as being not just this kind of strategic, kind of sexy idea of aligning corporate strategies and so on, but about managing risk. And it's about risk because of these potential and likely conflicts of interest. So the management reward is about managing risk, because employees are likely to want different things than than organisations are likely to want in terms of reward. Organisations might want to minimise reward, get more bang for their buck. Employees are going to want to maximise rewards, minimise the amount of work, they get them more reward. It's as simple, straightforward as that. But of course that's manifested in all kinds of ways. And because rewards represent a huge investment for organisations, massive amounts of fixed cost in rewards, that represents a huge risk to be managed. And so the management of reward isn't this kind of simple, joining the dots between corporate strategy and reward systems, but it's about managing those difficult areas of conflict within the employment relationship. So that's that idea of conflict, and managing conflict lies at the heart of how we're going to approach this matter in the module. So the module is titled Compensation, Conflict and Cooperation. Compensation because that's the American term for reward, and it gives me a third C. So it's kind of nice and neat, but the key thing is it's all about the conflict and cooperation. It's about bringing together these two aspects that are often taught distinctly from each other, reward and relations. Now, I understand why most people keep these subjects separate, because they represent two very distinct intellectual traditions, but there is a huge amount of crossover. Look at this quote here from George Milkovich, one of the kind of foremost scholars, retired now, but one of the most foremost scholars in his time of reward, and he talks about how compensation, rewards, pay lie at the heart of any employment exchange, absolutely fundamental for the way in which we might want to understand how people relate to their organisation, about their status, about their scope for freedom within the organisation, about the kind of work that they do, all of the things that constitute the nature of work. It's all symbolised, if nothing else, through the pay system. So there's an implicit and explicit relationship from one of the foremost reward scholars about the importance of placing employee reward within the wider employment relationship. And if we turn to employment relations scholars, and we look at someone like William Brown here, and he's kind of saying the same thing, from the opposite direction, from the employment relations point of view. He talks about the way in which the rewards that people get similarly constitute their place within the employment relationship. They're absolutely bound up with each other. So this is the approach that we're going to take to see how these things work together, to identify the relationships and links between all of these things in practice, because that's what we actually see in the real world. It isn't this kind of clean, sterile working out of a reward strategy which is then put in place. Employee rewards are the site of conflict. They're the cause of more conflict than anything else in organisations. They're the thing that gets affected most when organisations face tough times or when the economy takes a downturn. We can't separate it off as just some kind of offshoot of corporate strategy. So that's the approach that we're going to be taking here. In terms of how the module works, it's a fairly straightforward structure. It's all about activities. So obviously we're going to be doing all of the lectures online. It's how we've been doing it for years on this module. But in terms of the activity, in terms of what you do, we have a fairly straightforward structure. There are three key legs to this module. As I say, we've got reward, we've got relations. The third leg is about how that interaction between reward and relations take place, and that's about negotiation. It's about bargaining. It's about management not being able to just do whatever they want in terms of putting a reward practice in place. It's about the fact that they have to interact with the workforce to get approval, to come head to head with an alternative power source, to deal with the potential conflict and to overcome that through agreement, through negotiation. So, reward, relations and negotiation. And the activities that you're going to be involved in this module all revolve around those three aspects. So there are various phases to this module. We'll be starting off by talking about setting reward objectives. We'll be moving on to then start building a job structure, a pay structure, incentive schemes, bonuses, all of the kind of elements of a reward system. But at each phase of that, you're going to be working in teams, one side representing the workforce, one side representing the management, and you're going to come up with proposals, and you're going to then negotiate them in order to seek agreement with each other. So we'll have a session where you plan. What do we want? What are we going to do? What are the other side likely to do? To anticipate where they're likely to come from, to plan our negotiating strategy. So we'll have a planning session. You'll then negotiate formally. Now sometimes that negotiation will be inherently conflictual. What's the size of the bonus going to be? Well, it can either be bigger or it can be lower. So there may be areas where that is just implicitly conflictual, but it might be more cooperative as well, where you find joint areas of interest, areas where you can cooperate effectively. But that will be a negotiation. The third type of session that you'll have will be where you, as negotiators, report back to the people that you represent. So if you're representing the workforce, you'll be reporting back to the workforce, taken up as a role by your tutors. If you're representing management, you're reporting back to the chief executive of the organisation. Now, why is that important? It's important because part of understanding the nature of negotiations within an employment relationship is that there is a principal-agent relationship going on. Negotiating agents can develop their own interests within a negotiation. They can develop close relationships with their opposite number. So to deal with the potential for negotiators to sort of sell their principles down the river, you're going to have to justify the choices that you've made. You're going to have to defend the decisions and the agreements that you come up with, and you're going to have to engage in negotiating behaviour in line with that as well. So three types of sessions, each stage dealing with a phase of the activity, reach agreement and move on and start over. In terms of the assessment seeks to capture all of that activity, to capture the conceptualizing of the issues that you're attempting to deal with, the planning, the engagement, the negotiation, maybe the revisions that have to be made, where you have to backtrack and unpick something that you thought had been finalised, to make sense of all of that, to tell us the story of how you start from a blank sheet of paper and through negotiation deal with the conflicts that appear throughout the course of an ongoing negotiation. So that's the bulk of the assessment, and that represents a large group project by which the union negotiators, management negotiators tell us the story of the negotiation from their point of view, and to understand how it seemed to come back from the other side. So if you're on the union side, what were management doing? Why do you think they were doing that? How do we make sense of that? What did you do in response? Tell us that story. Make sense of it in terms of the theories that we'll introduce you to. Of how we make sense of the employment relationship. Why did these people behave this way? How did you respond? How do you utilise your knowledge of the subject in order to make sense of all of that? There's also an individual aspect to this assignment, where you reflect on particular bargaining behaviours to think about how that results in particular outcomes, because that's a very interesting area of negotiating practice and making sense of the employment relationship and making sense of how that affects employee rewards. So we're seeking to kind of bring all of these things together and also to integrate what we do in class with the assessment. So there is no series of activities and then a weird end assessment that you can kind of cram for at the end. This stuff starts very early in the module, and you need to start capturing all of those things that you're doing so that you can build upon that for the assessment that you submit at the end of the semester. All of that's quite hard work, it's quite demanding, it's a complex module, it requires a lot of effort and commitment from you. But we do put in the resources. There are some very well developed materials. Some of them developed by some of the leading lights in the subject. Some of them developed over the course of the last 15 years of running these modules. But lots of resources, lots of resources to support you in the way that you can engage with these activities with confidence. And of course, our key role here, my key role here as tutor, is to help you. You know, all of this is about activity, but this is about testing your ability to develop skills as negotiators, to build your understanding of the subject, and to do that, you utilise me. I'm there to facilitate. I'm also there to help and advise, so that when you're thinking about, okay, we've got this issue, we're kind of stuck, we don't know how to move the needle here, what do we do? My job there is to kind of make suggestions. My job there is to kind of ask pertinent questions to help move forward and help you develop your own understanding of these areas. And that's the way that this module works. It's all built around your activity, which allows you to develop your understanding and your skills as an employment relations practitioner, as a negotiator, as a reward management specialist. So like I say, the module is based around your role on one side or the other of the employment relationship. We've put you into groups, and the first step is, having been put in those groups, to get familiar with your brief. You know, these things don't happen in a bubble. The whole point of this is that they're highly contextualized. So what is the context in which this activity is going to take place? There's an organization. It's called Agrisoft. It has certain features. It has a certain type of workforce. It has a history. It has culture. It has values. It has problems. And it has strengths. So what are those things, and how do they look from the point of view of your side in this employment relationship? Do they look different from the management side than they do from the workforce side? How do we make sense of that? How do we start to put those issues into a way that allows us to kind of build a pay structure that responds to both those corporate pressures and to the pressures within the employment relationship? So your first step is to get familiar with your brief, to work on that, and to start thinking about how we can turn this into practical choices that we can take through the rest of the module. Okay, so that's the end of my introduction. Hopefully that sounds challenging, stimulating, interesting, and hopefully nobody's kind of quietly screaming into the corner of the room in response to all of that. It's a great module. We've had a lot of success on this module over the years, and so I'm really looking forward to seeing you as this year's intake taking on these challenges and building your knowledge and skills in these areas. So good luck, work hard, and obviously we'll deal with any questions as we go through. Thank you.